Hello, everybody. It's Saturday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm Chris Weuve. This is Starfleet Tactical, and I have with me frequent Starfleet Tactical guest, Chris Carlson. Chris, how are you doing this evening?
Not too bad. You?
Doing pretty good. It's busy because, of course, Connections Online is coming up. So anybody who's interested in doing a professional wargaming conference online, just look up Connections Online Wargaming, and it'll take you to the registration site, etc. But that's the week after next, and so we're not quite where we'd like to be in terms of preparation, but that's why Sunday exists. So I'm going to spend tomorrow working on Connections Online, and hopefully I have to do a presentation. I signed myself up to do a presentation in addition to running the conference.
That was not wise.
It made sense. The topic this year is wargaming soft factors, and so I'm doing the Scud Hunt report, which is a project I worked on 20 years ago, and the principal investigator is no longer with us, and that would be Peter Perla, and so I don't have a lot of the files, and so a lot of it's going to be me going like, yeah, I think we did X, but it is what it is. But it was a really cool experiment that we did back then. We had people play a game, and then we tried to codify how they, what the tools that they use to share information with each other, whether that affect their ability to play the game. It's an interesting little experiment. So yeah, it still gets cited. So. It's one of the things about my time at CNA I'm proud of. So let's see, before somebody asks, the t-shirt is Free Software Foundation, new, not Unix. So this may be like the oldest shirt I have in my regular rotation these days, because it does date. This is a 20-year-old shirt, at least a 20-year-old shirt. Although I did find a t-shirt the other day that's in my t-shirts to wear around the house because they're not fit for the outside world, that says Weuve Civ 1944 on the hem of it. And so I know that t-shirt went to sea. That t-shirt went to sea. And so that would have been, last time I went to sea was November 2004. So that's an old t-shirt too. But so we're going to talk a little bit about, wait for it, everybody, naval modularity, because it's a topic that I think altogether between the two of us,
at least 5 times.
Yeah. And I mean, I've done it a couple of times without you too. And when you include LCS and all the other stuff in it, it's probably closer to 10. But it's an interesting topic and it keeps coming back. And the genesis of today's show in particular is I called up Chris at one point and said, hey, do you know that the Danes, because it's always the Danes, right? Do you know that the Danes came up with this cool idea to do this modular weapon system? And he said, yeah, I showed you that stuff. And I said, when? And he said, when we did the LCS episode, the mine layer system was from that. And it's like, oh, I didn't realize it was part of like a system. I thought it was just a one-off thing, and it turns out it's part of a system. And for what it's worth, they're like, I think last year in June, they if I remember correctly, they actually conducted the first at-sea test of that mine laying system. So a lot of the documentation that you see on it is about 4 years old, because that's when they SH Defense, the company, did their big sort of reveal. But they are at the point where they've actually built hardware and they're testing hardware. So fingers crossed. So what we're going to do is I threw together some slides. A lot of them are slides that came from previous episodes that I've sort of pulled back in for context, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through it. And then the plan is to, I pulled some slides that sort of show the system, and I'll highlight the things that really caused me to say that's seriously cool, because there's some things about it that are seriously cool. And then I'm going to do something at the very end. I created a slide, and Chris and I will spend some time talking about this because I just realized that I've never actually done well, yeah, there's a bunch of pros, but there's also a bunch of cons. I've never really talked about the downsides of some of this stuff. And so I should emphasize Chris is an engineer. I was a quality engineer and a tech support engineer, which means I wasn't an engineer. I'm a poli-sci history guy who spent a lot of time hanging around engineers, et cetera, but Chris is actually like a no shit engineer. So, and Chris lives and breathes this stuff. I spend a fair amount of time in the space. Chris lives there. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that if Chris tells me that I'm full of shit, you should believe him and not me.
Okay. I would never say such a thing.
That's true. You wouldn't say it like that.
No, it'd be probably along the lines of charming fellow, tad slow.
That's an interesting opinion. Okay, so let me throw the slides up. And it's called the CUBE system. That's where the title comes from. And I'm also going to talk about a video that's online that Chris actually only found out about like literally 2 minutes before the show started that I was going to talk about this video. Although the link to it is in the description. It's a video by Dr. Alex Clark, and he's a British naval historian who talks about Stanflex in this video. Okay, so let's go ahead. The obligatory announcement slide. First of all, I'm shamelessly pulling images down, but they're all really cool images. When I cast my critical eye upon them, I think they're all really cool. And I'm using them for educational purposes to illustrate some of the points I'm making. Most of the stuff I pulled down is from SH Defense. My guess is SH Defense is going to be okay with me trying to sell their system for them. And so I don't think they're going to be a problem, but I tried to keep accreditation where I could for stuff. And I don't speak for my current employer. I don't speak for any of my past employers. Chris is his current employer. Maybe Chris speaks for himself. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that, Chris?
When my wife lets me.
Okay, good. Here's the obligatory schedule. Next week, boy, everybody and their brother wants me to do something next week. I've turned down 2 new things to do next week in the last 24 hours. I'm already at the point where I'm getting ready for my conference, which is starting the next week. And my sister is going to be in town. And I forget there's something else going on too. So I just decided that between I've got stuff going on at work too. I've just decided that between all of this stuff that's going on, I'm not even going to try to do an episode next week. If I get the time to actually work on the show at all, I'll try working on the episode for the following week, because I figure it's going to take me 2 weeks to put together one episode. And I don't know what that episode's going to be yet, but it's going to take me 2 weeks to put together one episode because I'm just that busy. On the 2nd of May, I am playing a war game with some friends that are coming into town. And so I will be unavailable on Saturday night. And then on the rest of May is a yes, except for the 30th of May, I'm going to be in Louisville, Kentucky at Wonderfest. Hopefully talking to Rick Sternbach and John Eves, who regularly go to Wonderfest. And so I know that you know who Sternbach is. Do you know who Eves is? Mm. A lot of those models that you see on Picard's wall behind him were done by John Eves.
Ah.
And he's published a book that is sort of a self-published thing. It's very hard to get, but I know a guy. It's a book of basically all these models he's done. If you go online, you'll see that he's an expert model maker, and he's done some very interesting things with various models, and some of them show up spray painted gold on the wall behind Picard, and some of them are just things that he's got in his house and stuff. So he's worked on Star Trek. So let's see. Is there anything else there worth saying? No. No, not right now. So, okay. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap. Chris and I are going to do a little bit of a recap. I'm pulling in a bunch of slides about real world modularity and some science fiction examples and stuff. And most of this is stuff that I've done before. Like, for instance, what I'm showing on the screen there from Albedo, a modular ship construction system, where they're not like modules like the Cube system or even like Stanflex, but it's very much modular construction. But canonically in universe, even though those look like floors, they're self-contained enough that apparently you can strip the outer hull off and pull them out. So it's somewhere between Stanflex and MECO in terms of its customizability. Then we're gonna talk about the Cube system a little bit, and then at the very end, I'm gonna have a slide that's basically the scorecard. I call it the scorecard slide. It's just listing some of the pros and cons of trying to do modular payloads, where at this point, we're really sort of talking about payloads. Modular construction, I mean, I tried to think of if there's any downsides of modular construction techniques, and I can't think of any.
There's only one.
Which is? It
takes more waste space. So
yeah.
Take the length of the unit, and you're adding about 15% to the length to be able to move the the hull sections around so you can stuff the modules in. Because you're not doing them simultaneously.
Yeah, that makes sense. You need a little bit more working room. And I think that my guess is there isn't a ship constructor on the planet that wouldn't gladly spend that extra space if they've got it.
That's an interesting comment, because that's a hot debate on the Chinese new construction halls on Huludao, because I don't think they're big enough for modular construction to have two simultaneously on the ways.
That could be okay. Yeah.
Too short.
I mean,
you want to see a production hall that designed for that. It's Severed Vinsk's Workshop 55. I think they renamed it Shed 2. Biggest damn shed you're ever going to find. But it's like 436 meters long. Specifically designed to build two Oscars at the same time on one way space.
Wow.
Yeah, it's monstrous.
Wow. Two Oscars at the same time.
That's because the other two ways are building one Typhoon.
Yeah. I miss doing submarine stuff. I got to go off and do Air Force stuff for a while, and Air Force stuff isn't as much fun as submarine stuff.
Yeah, because I look at modular submarine construction is easily something you can tweak into spacecraft.
Oh, yeah. In fact, we'll get to that. And I got a couple of submarine pictures in here, and it really sort of works. Okay, so let's talk a few terms. This is an old slide that I pulled back in, talking about modularity versus flexibility. And these are really kind of US definitions. Modularity just means that you're defining interfaces, and you've got things that are sort of intended to be plugged in as a unit. They're discrete elements. They have common interfaces, and you're able to plug them in. Anything else you'd add on that?
Just that the Brits would call it cellularity.
Yeah, the Brits call it cellularity. It's always fun. I mean, I don't know if you had this experience, but I very clearly remember when anytime I did Five Eyes stuff. So Brits, US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Whenever we had a Five Eyes meeting, or we were talking about something, it was always the case that the US had one set of terminology for stuff like this. The UK had another set. The Canadians were a carbon copy of the US set. And the Australians and the New Zealanders frequently like didn't have a dog in the fight because they weren't building anything. And the Australians were mostly the US stuff with a few little British things sprinkled in for flavoring. But like, you know, we'd have a conversation with the Brits, and if you read any of the British doctrine documents about like modular ship construction, et cetera, they've just got their own terminology. They do not borrow our terminology and stuff like that.
Actually, I would say I would go further than just Brit. I would say it works for most Western countries in Europe because their modularity concept is very close to the hybrid military civilian production idea.
Yeah.
And I'm fairly confident China does that as well.
And then there's the French. As the saying goes, the French don't copy anybody and nobody copies the French. And so for the record, I have a huge amount of respect for the French, and it's only going up because they, for a couple of reasons. First of all, the United States may be the most expeditionary military on the planet, but the French are the second most expeditionary military on the planet. They go places and they do stuff, and they usually do it very, very well, and they usually win in the process. And they've thought through their doctrine on a bunch of stuff. I'm still a little dodgy. They haven't sold me on their nuclear doctrine. But when it comes to like their armor doctrine, I think they've actually got their act together. Mm-hmm. And it took a long time to conclude that. But they do stuff that seems kind of weird. But you know, things like Stryker and some of the things that we've done, there every now and then you go like, why are we doing that? And it's like, oh, the French have been doing that for like 30 years, and we're kind of going like, maybe that makes sense. So, but flexibility in this is not really a defined term, at least in the US, that I was able to find, but it's just basically that it implies there's certain sort of mission adaptability. Now, adaptability is a term on the next slide when we talk about the Brits. I pulled stuff from the modular, I forget what it's called now, the modular naval concept. Have you read that document, Chris?
I don't think I've read that one.
They've got an actual doctrine document on naval modularity.
Well, I have read a number of the Royal Institute of Naval Architects that went into. I think it's probably got a lot of it in there.
Yeah, probably
but
does.
It's when you read what the Brits are talking about, it's their attempt to get around the manpower requirements for maintenance and updates.
Although, you know, you say that, in fact, you know what, let's go to the next slide because I think it's right there. The maritime modularity concept is what I was referring to. You say that, but the maritime modularity concept has a specific line in it where they say, yeah, everybody talks about how it's going to decrease maintenance, but don't believe them. Because it was something like many a plan has fallen apart on the shoals of crew fatigue or something like that. And that, you know, we had that problem with LCS, that we ran the crews ragged. And every time the US Navy tries to do minimal manning, they don't save manpower, they just move it someplace else, and they burn out the guys at sea.
What they forgot is what they talked about initially, is modularity was not for day-to-day operations purposes. It was about the big overhaul, the maintenance. What they're trying to get around is that 1 hour, 4 hour, 8 hour thing. 1 hour on a, on a 1 hour on a piece of steel, 4 hours on a module versus 8 hours in the hull.
Yeah.
That's what they were trying to get around, so that you could pull a module out. You have a guy over on the side working on the other one, so he finishes stuff in 1 hour rather than 8 hours in hull trying to get the same stuff done.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And for things like, you could do it for StandFlex. You certainly can do it for the Cube. It might be the right answer is you offload the modules into the maintenance input section of the maintenance facility, and from the output section you take some that have gone through their maintenance cycle and you reinstall them on your ship.
But see, that's where you get more into your flexibility and adaptability.
Yes. And so like they specifically in this concept, they talk about a flexible platform is something designed for a specific purpose, but it's got enough excess capacity, enough excess capability that it can do a bunch of other stuff too. So, okay, it's intended to be an ASW platform, but it can shoot down airplanes if it has to. Adaptable, on the other hand, is more along the lines of, I can load specialist capabilities on board. And the Cube system, which we're eventually going to get to. So for the record, the Brits don't talk about the Cube system at all, because different thing. But the Cube system, they talk about, your ship's a straight stick warship 1 week, and the next week it's a minesweeper, and the week after that it's doing humanitarian assistance, because you swap out the modules and then you swap out a bunch of the capability there. So I referenced the Alex Clark video on the subject of them turning down StandFlex. From what he said, Falklands is more your topic than mine, more your Jeopardy category than mine. But his comment was, after the Falklands War, the Royal Navy lost a bunch of ships in the Falklands War, and compared to the size of their force. And afterwards, they were like, okay, why did we have this problem? And they concluded that part of the problem was that their ships weren't very upgradable, that they had been trying to get the Lysander class, I guess, through the upgrade process, and it had been sort of a shit show. And they had some real severe problems with radars and some of their other sensors, that they had really they had built themselves around the idea that the job of the Royal Navy was to be a professional sub-hunting force in the North Atlantic. And that is not the job they were called upon to do in the Falklands. And when they got down there, they just weren't equipped for it, and that they needed to do something about that. And they've done a bunch of stuff about that over the years. And I went looking for it, and I couldn't find the document that I had read this in, but I remember reading about how at some point they said, we just don't like doing hot work. Hot work sucks, right? Mm-hmm. Pulling out the cutting torch and cutting a hole in the side of the hull so that you can pull out a big piece of gear just sucks. And anytime you have to do hot work, what's the ratio? There's a ratio.
Well, we say the U.S. says 1-4-8. The Brits say 1-5-10.
Okay, so and you have to set a fire watch, and you've got extra guys, and if you're the Russians, you still burn your ship down. And so anytime you can avoid cutting holes in the hull, you really want to avoid doing that. And so they adopted this radical technology that is totally and completely unheard of in the United States Navy, but it's really cutting edge technology called wide doorways and wide passageways. And their goal is that you should never have to cut metal in order to move a combat system in or out of their ops center, what we would call CIC. And so they did stuff like that. And, you know, the US Navy did, like, that's crazy talk.
I would qualify that by saying their central passageway is wide.
Yes, there has to be a path.
Right. And in fact, what drove its width was the availability to yank a gas turbine.
Yeah, that totally and completely makes sense to me. Totally.
Having walked down a Type 23 and a Type 22 Batch 3, yeah, I know how big those passageways are. They're huge.
Yeah, and I've never been on a foreign surface ship that was in commission.
Now, mind you, at one point in time in World War II, we did have wide passageways specifically designed to move munitions on a battleship from the after turret to the forward turret and vice versa.
Or after magazine to the forward.
After magazine, yeah.
And because the magazines are about the same size, but there's twice as many guns up front. So there's a good chance that you're going to have to move ammo around. That passageway was, I think, on every ship I've ever been on every battleship I've ever been on, it's called Broadway.
Yeah.
And it's like usually has a monorail along the top.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a girder that they can hang something on to move shells down.
A very stout girder.
A very stout girder, and it runs the entire length of the ship. And on Wisconsin, you couldn't walk down Broadway the last time I was there. And that's because they were having some issue with something outgassing or something. And for reasons having to do with it being easy, the USS Wisconsin is a building. For the purposes of like health certifications and stuff like that, they decided to declare it a building and put it under that regulatory framework because that was easy. And then the building inspector came up and said, like, you've got like all this fumes and shit. So there are parts of the ship where you have to like take the long way around, and you just can't. It used to be the case that you could just walk down Broadway, but last time I was there, you couldn't do that. Because So
But you want to know the real reason why the Brits had trouble at the Falklands?
Okay.
They're cheap. The Type 42 was the lowest possible cost for an area defense ship.
Yeah.
They parsed that thing down.
Do I remember correctly that they were originally talking about something that kind of looked like a high-low mix, and then for cost-cutting reasons, they didn't build the high?
Pretty much.
Yeah. The Brits are incredibly consistent in their ability to develop something world-class, and then some fucking accountant comes along and tells them no.
Yep.
I mean, they had a space program and they got rid of it. They developed like a world-class jet fighter, like world-class. And nope, we're not going to do that. Too expensive. And they consistently, they figure out what the right answer is, and they've got it. I mean, they know what the right answer is, and then they decide not to do it. So, yeah, it's a pain in the ass. So Alex Clark says that basically that they elected not to do it in large part because they viewed their ships as being that they were going to be larger, more specialized ships, and that Stanflex didn't quite get them what they needed in that regard.
Think of it this way. Stanflex is more littoral.
Yeah, it really is. And I talk about that later on, about how all these systems, you know, you're not loading Tomahawks into these modular systems. You're just not. And they're better for the short end. They're better for the point defense end. They're better for things like that. And, you could easily look at it and say, like, well, how can the Danes do this? And the US just sort of dropped the ball when it came to LCS. I would argue the LCS was more ambitious than what the Danes are doing.
It was, but it was also not, because
whether they should have been more ambitious or not is another question.
Well, for budgetary purposes, they split out the modules from the C-frame, which was a real mistake.
So the comment here, the TRS-2 comes to mind. That is exactly the airplane I was thinking of. Mm-hmm. Exactly the airplane I was thinking of. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide. So a little bit on real world modularity. Modularity means different things to different people. And somewhere there's a great graphic that I couldn't find. I spent about 15 minutes looking for it today and just couldn't find it, that sort of covered all of this in sort of more of a graphical format. As a general rule, there's lots of advantages to using modular building techniques. On the one hand, maybe your ways have to be bigger, but on the other hand, you can sort of have a lot of the construction be farmed out to other people at smaller shipyards, and then they just deliver the module. And so this is how you end up with like the sail of a submarine on a truck going down the street, things like that. And so but that's a construction technique. You don't disassemble an aircraft carrier to swap out the superlift modules later on. You have things that are like pre-configured systems, like the MECO system from the Germans. And the difference between the modular construction techniques and MECO is that, at least in theory on MECO, you can go to the manual and order a la carte. This is a predefined thing and I'll take 3 of them. Whereas for the modular construction techniques, you're really sort of designing the modules, and maybe all the modules on a Nimitz class aircraft carrier are approximately the same. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that there's a book where if you're building some other kind of ship, you can go and say, I want one of those.
Well, the big thing with the book for MECO is you tell them the size of the hull you want, and then they tell you how many spots of what size will go on that hull. And then you go to the menu and you grab the bucket, you grab the things that go in the holes the way you want it to do, because they all plug in, all their support, the electrical, the hydraulics, the compressed air, cooling is all set up so it will fit to any module.
Yeah. But they weld all that shit down, right?
Yes, that stuff all gets welded down.
Because MECO is one of those things that if you send a ship into a shipyard for a couple of months to have a major overhaul, major refit, you can pull that stuff out, et cetera, et cetera. The difference between it and StanFlex is a module like this picture on the right, where you need like an impact wrench and a crane. And you're good. Yeah. That's not welded in place. That's bolted in place, and it's got common interfaces, so it plugs in. And so, in theory, and practice are the same. In practice, are frequently different. In theory, you show up at the shipyard at 8 o'clock in the morning, and maybe by noon the next day, you're going out with your new modules. I don't think that actually works in practice.
Yeah, MECO, when they pushed the modularity concept that they were looking, it was to make the appeal that modernization during an overhaul was much easier to do with their concept.
Yes, yeah, and that worked, and StanFlex even more so. And there's also the opposite of modernization, sort of, kind of, which is, I just learned this the other day, that a lot of the modules that are on the current generation of Danish warships, which is the second generation of the StanFlex capable ships, came from the first generation of ships. When they decommed the ships, they saved the modules because the modules had some life on them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they talk about in that maritime modularity concept for the Brits, which is an idea that I hadn't thought of, but it's so obvious, which is, okay, you've always got an issue with crew training. The Danes ran into that, right? Everybody has, if you don't have something installed, yeah, maybe I can swap it out in 6 hours, and now I've got a new piece of gear. None of my people are trained on that piece of gear. It still requires some time to get proficiency. And so if you solve the critical path problem, if you get rid of the long pole in the tent, it doesn't mean that you don't have any poles left. It means it just shifts to something else, right? And so it used to be the case, at the very least, that if the ship's in the shipyard for 6 months, the crew can be attending classes, et cetera, about their new weapon system, getting some training on the new weapon system. That doesn't happen when it's only a 6-hour swap out. And so the Danes ran into that problem at least a little bit. But the Brits in the maritime modularity concept are talking about things like on Royal Fleet auxiliaries having sockets in place that they can add a modular system to, and you don't need to deploy it when it's peacetime. Royal Fleet auxiliaries are not expecting to go into combat on a moment's notice. They're going to have some warning. And when it's time for when they think the balloon might be going up, then they install the weapon system, which has been in a nice climate controlled building this entire time. And they also unload the crew that is, at least in theory, capable of using it. Now, of course, you run into the same problem that the US Navy runs into with LCS, is this assumption that you can warehouse people, that there's these guys in suspended animation that you just have to thaw out some guys to go with the mission module when you install the mission module, which, that doesn't work. And I made a prediction to Norman Polmar when LCS was just a good idea. And my prediction was they were never going to swap out any module. And I read today that LCS has never swapped out a module.
Nope.
And for like an in-service module. I mean, they've practiced doing it. No ship has ever had its module swapped just so that they could go do another mission instead. That doesn't surprise me at all. So it's also worth pointing out that aircraft carriers are the ultimate in modular warships. Their modules are called aircraft, and they can just fly off their modules and fly new ones on. And we've been doing that for, that's one of the reasons why aircraft carriers last 50 years, is because they're easy to upgrade by flying off the airplanes and flying new ones on. So in theory, mission modules and LCS were operationally swappable. There was always this idea that you could just pull up to some random port and swap modules out. In practice, no, you couldn't, which is one of the reasons why they don't swap them around. What they thought was going to be a 2 or 3 day thing is a weeks long thing. It doesn't help the fact that there's multiple software loads. So I spent a long time in one episode talking about the Absalon. I absolutely love this. It used to be called a command and support ship. It is now, they've reclassified it a frigate. Because it's got approximately the weapons of a frigate, although it's pretty good size for a frigate displacement wise. And it's got this huge mission bay that I just absolutely love, that mission bay. And it's got enough of that ramp apparently can take Dutch tanks. So they can load armored vehicles onto it and use it as a light transport. So this actually, I think, is a really, really, really good model for like the colonial marines and aliens. This is the Sulaco. This is kind of the Sulaco. And it doesn't have the combat drop capability, but in other ways, it could be the Sulaco. And of course, our old favorite, the LCS with its huge mission bay and the LCS-2 class. And this is just a recycled slide, so ignore all the stuff on the left. So, and this is also a recycled slide because they decided that they were going to arm some of these ships by putting these containerized, that is a containerized Mark 41 VLS, and I forget, it's like a Mark 70 something like that. You can also use this for Aegis Ashore. That's a four cell launcher, and the idea is that they've got this nice big flight deck on the back of these things. So let's clobber it by putting a container in the middle of the flight deck. And of course, submarines can be very, very modular. This is the A-26, the Swedish submarine, where those modules, you can order it in short, medium, and long. Grande? Do they call it grande? Basically, what you get is more fuel. So you can have this coastal defense submarine. I think the Swedes default to the medium length one for themselves. But they are prepared to do an oceanic version, which has an extra fuel module to extend the range.
It's not just fuel. They actually have more food storage, more refrigeration. It's basically everything you need for endurance. So a little bit more heating, ventilation type stuff, consumables, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense. And did the Swedes talk to the Aussies about the Aussies buying something like this before they decided to go nuclear? Were they part of that discussion?
I don't recall.
And because I don't think I ever
the Germans, the Japanese, and the French.
Yeah, and I always wondered, why wasn't this boat part of that discussion?
Because I think even the long is pretty short range for the Aussies.
Okay, that could be. I don't remember what the range is. And the Aussies, of course, have a problem in that they're a long way from anywhere except New Zealand. So, speaking of modular construction, I believe this is the command module of an Astute. And as you all can see, you can build the hull, and then you build this module, and this is basically, that's 2 decks worth. So
yeah, I think so.
And then you probably have 1 deck underneath, and then the bilge, and there's a top module and a bottom module. And so you build all that stuff in advance, and this is the reason why it's 15% longer, is because you need to have room to maneuver a big ass thing like this into place and then slide it into the submarine. And if I remember correctly, Hayden on his site on Covert Shores, there's a blog post that he did that is all about constructing the Astute and has lots of different angles of them sliding things like this in. And, this is, I suppose in theory, you could cut the submarine hull and pull this module out as part of a major refit.
The interesting thing is, for mostly Astute to really be able to do a lot of this, it's a very big boat. Yeah. It's like 11.25 meters in beam. And this is a single hull submarine.
Which means it's even bigger than an LA in that regard.
It's bigger than, it's about, it's almost a meter wider than a Virginia.
So it's basically, it's between Virginia and Seawolf.
Yeah.
Yeah, Seawolf was what, 40 feet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If we go back here for a second, it's one thing that I kind of like about the Swedes is the Swedes will do refurbishment of their boats, and they'll do things like cut their submarine in half and put a new module in the middle. And do everything they need to do to basically get to the point where they can reset the odometer to 0 on it. Now, I'll note, boy, it helps that the Baltic isn't very deep, right?
Yeah, it's not at all.
And the reason why that's important is because the lifespan of a submarine is hull life, usually. And that is about how many ups and downs you do. Just like the lifespan of an airplane, of an airliner, is how many ups and downs you do. Which is why if you want to age an airliner really, really fast, you send it to Hawaii and let it do the shuttle run. Because when they're flying back and forth between those Hawaiian islands, they'll do like 10 cycles a day. Whereas if you're flying cross country, you may only do 1 a day, maybe 2. So, okay. So let's talk about science fiction modular spacecraft. There's a lot of different things that I'm just going to mention sort of in passing here. So we've already talked about the Albedo RPG. We talked about that. There's the Eagle, of course, you can argue is a modular spacecraft, although in that it's got a payload module it can swap out. If you're a Traveler player, you, of course, think about the modular cutter. It's even there in the name, where you can swap out. It's basically the Eagle, except it's round and kind of ugly. Ugly, but in a cool kind of way, in a very functional kind of way. I would argue Thunderbird 4 is a modular
2.
Oh, you're right. 4 is the submarine.
Yep.
Damn it. I feel bad. I was going to check that and I didn't. I did a write-up at my last job as an example for how to write a concept card to submit your technical concept for a game. I researched Thunderbird 2 and did a write-up of Thunderbird 2 as the unclassified example I could send out to everybody. And, I'd really like to build Thunderbird 2 because it had like a huge range and a huge payload, and it did everything at like Mach 8. But unfortunately, it's not real.
Yes.
And then the final thing on this list is the spacecraft from the little-known SPI role-playing game Honorverse, the justifiably little-known SPI role-playing game Honorverse, and its tactical space combat board game Delta V, which all of the spacecraft, basically all the main capabilities of the spacecraft came from pods that you attached to the spacecraft, and they had varying capabilities and varying costs, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought the main problem with the pod system was that I don't think that they had thought it through all the way. And but it's got this capability, like if you want your spacecraft to jump to another star system, you have to have a jump pod, which means you can quantify. We always talk about battle riders, and if you don't have to have a jump engine, you at least in theory have an advantage. You could actually quantify it. It's one pod. You get an extra pod if you don't bother with a jump engine, and so that could potentially help you. And so every now and then I get drawn back into Delta V, and I always end up concluding that I could do better. And one day real soon now I'm going to, and I just never get around to it because, I'm busy doing the show. Okay, there's, of course, lots and lots of Star Trek examples of modular construction. In fact, Miranda's versus constellations, all the different various flavors that came out of the Galaxy family. the model makers treat it like it's a modular construction, and as a result, the universe does too. And you end up with all these interesting starship designs because the model makers are doing modular construction on it. But in addition to that, this is one of the ships that's actually canonically intended to be a modular swap out of capabilities type of ship, where you've got, and as a result, I really like the Danube class. You've got this command pod, you've got the warp sled that sort of has all your basic power, and then you've got cargo modules that can have various subsystems swapped out. And we never see them do anything with that. I always thought they left money on the table because they never really did anything with swapping out pods on runabouts.
Well, in regard to the cargo modules, that's true. But the only modular thing we saw is when they slapped the photon torpedo launcher on the top.
Yeah, and they just added it on. They didn't actually like replace anything else. They just added it on. So I always thought they left money on the table there. Patrick Ross pointed out the Thores and had different modules in 2300, and I didn't even remember that. I thought about diving into 2300 because 2300 is very interesting from a modularity standpoint in that all the spacecraft have discrete parts. And for some of them, there's a little bit of like, do I put in a spin section or not? I guess, come to think of it, one of the designs does actually have a lot of modularity involved with it, but there's less than I would expect. I'm going to get to Jovian Chronicles in a second because, of course, Jovian Chronicles has a lot of that stuff. I also talked about this, which is a fan design, totally and completely non-canon, where every one of those pi wedges, except for the ones for basically the, I don't know, it's like the quarter at the very back.
That was with the impulse engines.
Yeah, the part that actually connects.
You don't get to pull those.
Yeah, you don't get to pull those. But everything else is basically a module that you can sort of pull off. And I didn't include a picture on this slide because this is a recycled slide. I didn't include a picture on this slide that actually has that part that comes off, that shows it with it come off. And of course, Jovian Chronicles, which I'm going to do a show on at some point. I just got to read all the Jovian Chronicles stuff to get up to speed. And in the background, these are two different ships. The one on the right is the Alexander class. I think it's a destroyer, if I remember correctly. And canonically, in the background, it didn't used to have that spin habitat. They disassembled the ship and added a spin habitat. And DreamPod 9, bless them, in the back of the book has a page of all the different parts, with the idea being that you can photocopy them and get out your X-Acto knife and build your own spacecraft. I absolutely love that idea. Okay, so let's talk about the CUBE system because we're almost an hour in and I haven't actually shown any of this stuff yet. SH Defense in Denmark from about 4 years ago. And the idea is that everything is on a standard ISO footprint. So it's either a 20-foot container footprint, a 40-foot container footprint, or some aggregation thereof. And so you have the bottom platform. You may or may not have a frame around it. You may or may not have sides around it. But the important part is you've got that bottom platform that will lock into place in the same way that a shipping container does. So you have a deck that's prepared and you can lock it into place. And you can have things like torpedoes and UUVs and firefighting gear and missiles and cranes and all sorts of stuff. And so here's some pictures that originally came out of, I'm trying to remember if I pulled these from your, no, these ones I did not pull from your presentation. At one point I had pulled some from the presentation, but I went and found these and used them instead. where what you're looking at the top is it's a mine layer, and you've got the mine layer mechanism pod, and then you've got storage pods behind it. So the one in front is the thing that actually puts them into the water. You can see an illustration of it down below with the sides off, because you'd expect the sides to be off so that workers can get in and pull levers and do stuff like that. And then you've got the pods that the storage containers behind it. Look at that grid work on the deck. That grid work on the deck is there for a reason, and that's because it's the tracked system that all of this stuff moves around on. So you build in a track, and that lets you move these containers around. So I think this one might actually have come from.
It did, yeah. I put this one in.
And so look, it's got the grid work on the deck. And so the entire idea is that, you poop these things out the back, you slide the ones from the storage unit at back to the storage unit that's in the front, and then you move out that back storage unit that's now empty, and you put another one in. And so you move all your stuff around, and everything can get to those launchers, and you can get them out. So you have to have some space available to move stuff around in. But you can have that bay pretty full, and you can move stuff around in it. And I think, I thought for a second I had another one that was another view of that, but this shows some other stuff. Missiles are kind of a problem because you've got exhaust, and the missiles might be kind of large. And so their solution is to actually have the missile be up on deck. The thing on the left is a drone launcher of some sort where you can do loitering munitions, basically. So it's not really a missile. It's more like a radio controlled airplane. And that I picked that illustration because it's specifically one that's sticking out of the side of the ship. It's not one that is going out the top. And so that's another thing about this is because you can have stuff, you can have multiple different systems accessing the same hatches to the outside. So if you're trying to maintain some sort of low observable signature, right? If you're trying to using shaping and other techniques to make your ship kind of stealthy, every time you have an opening in the hull, you've got the potential of making things, increasing the radar return, et cetera. In this case, you've got a limited number of doors, and you can move the systems around to access the doors. If you want to do two things at the same time, you've got a problem, especially if one of them is a defensive system and one of them is an offensive system. I guess you just have to tell the bad guys they're not allowed to shoot you while you're shooting at them. Does that usually work, Chris?
No.
I like this because it shows all the different connectivity things that they are prepared for. And so you've got various flavors of water that go in, ins and outs. You've got power going in. You've got different data for different systems with dedicated launching and fire lines that are separate from the data lines. And so this is all the things that your module needs to be prepared to do, and that you, in the spot where you're going to actually use the module, you need to be. This is the stuff that you would send to the module from the ship. And I'm going to mention that more about that later. Do you see anything missing there?
The only thing I can think of is maybe USB ports for maintenance routines.
Yeah, like software uploads and stuff. Yeah, because it's probably got firmware in it.
Mm-hmm.
Aircraft engine have ports like that. In fact, these days on modern business jets, if you want to get a better engine, a lot of times they send a technician out with a laptop. He plugs into your engine and activates the codes that make your engine better. Which there's part of me that thinks that's really cool, and there's part of me that utterly hates that. So how do you move all this stuff around? Well, they've got the C-state skidding system. And so the idea is that you've got this frame that it's mounted to, and the frame interacts with that rail system, that grid network, to move it around and to lock it in place when it gets to the place where it needs to be locked into place to use it. And what's also nifty about this is that this is a standard ISO size. And so you can, if you've got some other containerized thing that you want to put in there, like just a regular shipping container, you can attach a regular shipping container to that and treat it like it's part of the system. So if somebody else is putting something in a containerized system that is compatible with that, then that'll work. I don't know. The Brits have this thing called pods, which is basically their modular shipping containerized system that they talk about in the modularity concept document. I haven't seen anything that's indicated exactly what the size is and whether it's ISO compatible or anything like that. I think there's a 50-50 chance that they'll do something that's non-compatible. Just because, you know, just because. There's 100% chance that we would do something that's non-compatible. But in any event, this stuff all clamps in place, and there's some of the stuff that you see on this particular skid is optional. Like, for instance, you don't have to have the battery pack and charger. You can always just plug in outside power to make the motors run and stuff like that. But this is the thing that they rest on and move around on. And so here's a bay that's all set up, and you can move stuff around in the bay. You've got doors that can access the outside that also are some of the points at which you load stuff in, and you just need to make sure that you load stuff in the right order and you can index it into place. And I'm sure it's just like the flight deck or the hangar deck. The more stuff you have in it, the harder it is to move stuff around, and the more thinking you have to do when you're playing the little magic square game with all of your modules, the more thinking you have to do on how to move it around. And then when you're ashore, you've got a couple of different dedicated loader things that sort of move around on shore on wheels. There's another photo I did include that has a guy who's basically got a control unit that's sort of plugged into it, and he's got joysticks to move it around. One of them is like loading from the short end, and that's specifically designed to go in through rear hatches. And then there's another one that's designed to load from the side. And in both of those cases, there's sort of like a built-in scissor jack so that they can lift it up so that it's even and then slide it in. And so it automatically does all that stuff. And here shows some of the configuration options. So as you can see, they've got them up to 40-foot stacked too high and too wide as a potential. I think, and some of those are clearly like they're intended to be loaded in that configuration. Like that 40x2 that they show. So you've got a lot of flexibility there. That's still not enough that's going to, you know, you're not going to replace Mark 41 VLS launchers with this thing.
Nope.
And you're always going to have magazine issues with it. So there's clearly some things that it's better at than others. And actually, that might be the next slide. Yeah, that's the next slide. So the modular payload stuff and chime in if you've got anything to add. I would argue modular payload, the pros are that it has a, rapid reconfiguration, and rapid's in quotes because rapid is, a user-defined term. You can reuse the things. You can have cost savings and maintenance because you can do the maintenance ashore, and you can keep, if you're not using something, you can keep it undercover. There's cost savings and procurement because you can just order a whole bunch. You could, potentially just like, I've got enough end of year money for another pod, so I'll order another pod. Probably better doing that than buying $100,000 worth of shrimp or whatever it was. You can install stuff only when you need it, like in auxiliaries, like we're going to war. So maybe the oiler actually needs a self-defense weapon that it wouldn't normally need. And you can minimize upgrade costs by being able to upgrading individual modules as a new system comes online, right? We've got a better torpedo launcher, so we'll replace the torpedo launcher, and I don't have to upgrade the rest of the ship. I can just upgrade that thing by loading a new thing on board. They do limit your dimensions a lot, though, and it limits your magazine depth. For something that is going out the back, like mines, I can easily envision that you could have hundreds of mines in the bay. But if you wanted to use it for something like that, you were going to use missiles, I'm having a harder time envisioning a scenario where you can use where you're storing hundreds of missiles that have any sort of range. With the possible exception of a harpoon in a container that you poop out just like it's a mine. Doesn't work for things like radars. For things like, if you're going to plan ahead for the future, because you might put something in that's higher power, it means you need to build your ship with higher power capability. So almost by definition, you're building excess capacity into the ship that you're not planning on using, at least in the short term. And on the one hand, a lot of people talk about, it's good to do that. It's good to have margin for growth, et cetera, et cetera. But if I've got to do that for everything, then there is an overhead associated with this system, with a system like this, that you may not be taking full advantage of. You may never take full advantage of. All right, what I forget, Chris? Oh, screening there, but
have you seen the photos of the Chinese container ship?
Yes.
Huangda 79.
Yes, with the radar, I found
staring at the bridge. Yes.
The radar was the most interesting part of that. I mean, missiles. Yeah, got it. Missiles. Okay. But the fact that they had a containerized radar was kind of interesting.
Actually, they had two different kinds.
Yeah, that's true. They did.
They had the AESA one, and then they had the over-horizon targeting one.
And at least one of them did not have, I want to say, wasn't it on one side of the ship and clearly couldn't see through the container to the other side of the ship?
Yeah, that was the Type 366 targeting radar.
So I guess you're only allowed to attack the ship from that side.
Yeah. This ship is going to have its own little mini article in the next SITREP.
Oh, okay. So for people that are interested in naval stuff, Chris, as one of the designers of the Harpoon war game, he and Larry Bond also have supplemental materials for that war game that frequently are just plain world-class articles on certain subjects that at the end mention the fact that there's a game involved.
No, we tell you how the game uses it.
Yeah, but I mean, my point is, you don't have to be a harpoon player to want to get the sit rep. There's lots of good stuff.
There's lots of other stuff. Yeah.
That, it basically boils down to, there's about 3 paragraphs in the article that you can just ignore if you're not a gamer, but the rest of it you want. And they also have like what's the exact name of the Chinese Navy book? The plan book.
China's Navy.
Oh, okay. Which you update on a quarterly basis?
We try to, yeah.
So basically you buy it once and it's a subscription.
Oh, well, that one is the Modern Chinese Maritime Forces. That's more of a reference book.
Yeah, although, that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah, we're probably not going to be doing a lot of more updates. The author seems to be having some health issues.
Oh, that's a shame.
Well, he's a lot older than either Larry. Well, he may be as old as Larry. Maybe, if not a little older.
There are people as old as Larry?
Just don't tell him that.
So, Larry's not that old. So, let's see. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. What else about this subject have we not talked about that we should talk about before we go? Before I go back and look at all the comments.
Well, on a maritime aspect, I think a lot of your cons are there. On a space aspect, I think a lot of your cons go away.
Yeah. In fact, I seriously considered pulling in some of the slides from the rotary container ship talk that I did, which was almost a little over 5 years ago. I did it on April 3rd of 2021 about the rotary container ship that BuNine had designed for the Honorverse. And then it's not David didn't like the idea, so it's not an Honorverse thing. But it used 2 different size containers. Planetary shipping containers are basically the size of a current 40-foot shipping container. It's a little bit different. Like they're 3 meters instead of what it's 8.6 feet, yes. 8.5 feet, I think, for a regular shipping container. But they're 3 meters by 3 meters by 12 meters, if I remember correctly, 12 or 13. And then they slot into something called a interstellar shipping container in a 3x9 grid. And the purpose of that is because in David's universe, where you've got tractor beams that can move everybody around, they've had tractor beams longer than we've had the printing press. It is a well-established technology. And as a result of that, it's easy to manipulate big things like that. And it's easier to manipulate like one great big thing that has 27 of these little things in if you're in space. And the ship will just sort of poop them out and use tractor beams to move them around. Well, each one of those is, if you think about you've got one thing that's 3 by 3 by 13 meters. And then you've got something that holds 27 of those. That thing that holds 27 of those is effectively a 3-story building.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got modules that are the size of 3-story buildings. You can put a lot of shit in that. A Trident missile just barely does not fit in a 40-foot shipping container. Just barely. It might actually technically fit, but it doesn't let you have any room for anything on either end, which you're going to need, right? And so if you think about it, this is something, and you could probably fit from a width standpoint. I can't remember if I did the calculation and concluded that you could fit, if you put them in diagonally, if you could put 2 in a shipping container or not, assuming that it was long enough. Like if you got one of those extended 40-foot units, that might actually work. And if you're just going to shoot them out one end, right? You're not going to raise them. You're just going to shoot them out one end. So, I mean, you could put a pretty good salvo size of some pretty good sized missiles in a 3-story building that you then deploy with a tractor beam. I don't think magazine depth is a problem at that point.
No.
So I think I like, as a general rule, I like the idea of modular ships in science fiction. I like the idea of being able to sort of swap out payloads and stuff like that. I think that actually works really well. And in Star Trek, we see a lot less of it than we should. Like, we see it in the Danube, then they never do it. It's the only time I remember them actually sort of deciding that they're going to put it in. The closest we get is things like the Nebula, or that big hat on top. They talk about how they can put different pods on it. But none of that is like pull into port and just sort of swap out the pod. We got to, we'll come in at 8 o'clock and we'll be at sea for dinner. None of that happens in that universe. It's
you got the tug.
The tug. Oh yeah, that's true. That's true. What is it? The Saladin class? No, the Saladin.
Saladin's the destroyer.
Saladin's the destroyer. The Ptolemy. It's the Ptolemy. Ptolemy class tug. Which of course runs into the entire is Franz Joseph canon thing. But
it's true. But having run around in Starfleet battles with a battle pod, maybe wicked little things.
I really like the Ptolemy class. I really like the Ptolemy class. So, all right, let me scroll through here real quick and see if there's any questions or comments that I haven't already responded to, because I responded to a bunch while we were going through. Hello, everybody. So Dustin asks, what's our favorite tossed bridge? I think for me, it's probably just the regular classic bridge. The one that we see in most of the shows. Although I don't think that they use the bridge. I don't think they use that bridge properly, because Andy Presby has a theory, and I'm totally sold on it. What's with the big screens above all of the stations? The person sitting at that station really can't see it. They're not for the person sitting at the station. They're for the captain. That's a place where you can put your stuff up that you want the captain to see, and he can just swivel around and go, okay, life support's at such and such. Okay, the hailing frequencies are open. You can just look at all that stuff just by swiveling his chair. That's
not what they use it for. They use it for artwork.
They use it for artwork, and they use it for Spock briefing Kirk with the two of them standing next to it, which, perfectly valid use, but the line of sight is perfect for when he's sitting in the chair, being able to see it.
Yeah.
Also, that bridge is a lot smaller than you think it is.
And I think it's badly placed.
Oh, you mean the place where, I suppose you could make the argument that you're dealing with such high energies that anything that could destroy the bridge is just going to destroy the ship. But yeah. Now
there's this little weird thing called armor. Armor.
They make canned meat, don't they?
That too.
Well, the explanation that we get from Sternbach and Okuda as to why it's on the top, because it's a module and they can pop it out, which is been retconned as the explanation as to why the bridge module is always different in all the movies, to which my response is, our Starfleet designers so bad that they can't get it right, that they keep having to replace it.
Mm-hmm. Or is it because the producers want to see something different every time they can?
Well, you want to hear something funny about that? There is there's a guy who goes, his channel name is Junk Ball.
Junk Ball. Okay.
Junk Ball. And Junk Ball did a detailed breakdown of the next gen bridge. That bridge changed 2 or 3 times per season. The carpet changes, the seats change. I mean, some of them are obvious, right? Because they like Data and Worf, when he was manning a console up front, they were like reclined like this,
yeah,
and they got rid of those and they let them sit up like adults. And then you had things like the extra little seats by Picard, and whether they had a flip up video thing or not, and stuff like that. But there's a lot of other things, including like they were constantly replacing the carpet, they were constantly doing stuff on the walls. They changed it like 3 times a season throughout the entire run of that show. And the Junk Ball article on essay on that, video on that, is really good. So I did an episode on the TOS bridge and why it's wonky, you know, the offset and stuff like that, and what they could have done differently. So, okay, scrolling. Okay, there's a couple of things here where I don't understand the comment, and I'm just going to scroll right up by.
Oh, what does he mean?
Patrick Ross says, I wonder how the Canadian terminology is going to change now that we're getting patrol subs from South Korea. I'm not sure that it will, because, well, it might. Most of the things I'm thinking about are kind of in the doctrine category. Although some of them are things like the Brits have a different word for the internet backbone, the data backbone of the ship. And I forget what the word is, but they don't call it a backbone. They call it something else. Everybody else called it the backbone.
Yeah, one of the things I'm working on is I'm one of 6 people doing histories of certain particular navies that have developed nuclear submarines, and we're writing these for the South Koreans.
Okay.
And you are to provide insights from the historical country that you're working on. And I'm doing Russia, which means I've got the biggest one. I have some interesting options for them.
Such as?
I'm just going to ask them one question. How fast do you want to go?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
they really did the entire gamut from the fastest nuclear submarine to the slowest nuclear submarine.
And the deepest diving.
Yeah. Maybe the second slowest.
What do you think was the slowest?
NR1.
Yeah, that's the slowest.
But I mean,
even though Shark's faster than NR1.
Well, I was thinking what was the submarine that had the little the nuclear auxiliary power unit thing? Yeah,
that's the Googie boats.
Uniform. No. I'm thinking they did it on like a.
Oh, you're talking the 651E, the Juliet.
Yeah, the Juliet.
Yeah, with the VAU-6.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's actually for the rest of the world. There's an interesting topic there about the idea of a full performance nuclear submarine with a full on nuclear reactor that lets you do all the things versus something that just basically emulates a battery and gives you like approximately the performance that you would have in a diesel electric submarine if you're on the battery. The difference is it gives you that performance for like the next 2 years.
Depends on the power level.
Depends on the power level.
Yeah, if you take a like one of the suggestions I'm giving them using their KS3 batch 2s, if you take a 15 megawatt thermal reactor, you can run around at 12 knots without even touching the battery.
How big a reactor?
15 megawatt thermal.
Was the Juliet wasn't that big though, was it? The Juliet reactor?
Basically 5.
Yeah.
But all the Googie boats are 10 to 12.
So.
And what I think's on the Type 041 is in that, 10 to 12 to 15 range.
I forget what the what NR1 was. There's a really good book on
1
NR1.
megawatt.
Yeah. And it basically was stuck over in the corner next to the coffee machine.
Nah, not quite, but
might as well have been.
Shielding, my friend, shielding. Takes up space.
So let's see. Okay. One Horse Shea points out Constitution class heavy cruiser has a lot of flexibility, whereas a Miranda is adaptable. That actually really, really works. I am in love with that huge hangar bay on the Miranda and all the things that you can do with that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a trade-off there. I mean, I've made the argument before that the Miranda is boldly goes where people have already gone before. That the Miranda was not designed to be a first-line explorer. It was designed to be the follow-up explorer and the military ship for when the Klingons came pouring over the border. And so that I think Starfleet arms all of its ships because it knows that when it goes to a war footing, it might have to do it pretty fast. And it's useful to have some weapons capability around, but Mirandas don't have deflectors, and so I don't think they're going around at high warp. If you think about it, from a volume standpoint, the Miranda is bigger. Certainly had a lot more weapons than the Enterprise did in Wrath of Khan. The one thing that the Enterprise really had, which did not matter in that scenario, is the big ass deflector. The big ass deflector.
Mm-hmm.
So Olive says, no, South Korea makes some good stuff, but I hadn't heard about the subs. The South Koreans are currently in the process of selling every platform to everybody. I'm going to be interested to see if they're able to meet their delivery schedules.
Well, first of all, realize they build to a hybrid.
Yeah.
Military civilian standard. And depending on the time of year, phase of the moon, the number one shipbuilding country is either Japan, South Korea, or China.
Yeah.
So I'm not quite as worried as you are because they don't specialize their military production. The guy can work on a container ship the next week.
And I think actually probably on the submarine side is the place I'm least worried about. But I mean, they're selling tanks to anybody who wants to buy tanks from them, and they're getting ready to sell their the Bore fighter to people. And that's air stuff is tough to assess.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's so much about the air side of things that is things like cockpit ergonomics and the sensor fusion battle management system on board the airplane. And, you can't get that from looking at pictures of the outside. You just can't. And so like Russian airplanes, famously have some really, really good designs with really shitty cockpit ergonomics. Because they have a tendency to
not so hot engines either.
Yeah, well, I mean, the engines are great until they fall apart. Because
the time between failures a little on the short side.
Well, I mean, the time between failures is 4 days, and the plane's only going to last for 3. because it's going to get shot down in the middle of a war. I mean, this is the Russian attitude is that all of this stuff is expendable, up to and including their people. Why bother putting the money into them to get a long mean time between failures when I'm never going to get to the point where that's going to matter in the middle of a war? The U.S. response to that is, yeah, but most of the time you fly this thing, it's going to be peacetime. And that war may never occur, but peace will definitely occur, and you're going to be flying it in peacetime. And so you of course know the story of the Tarantale. So it used to be that you could go to the Battleship Massachusetts Memorial at Battleship Cove in Fall River, Massachusetts, and you could see a former East German corvette, really missile boat, called the Hidden Sea, that was a Tarantale class. And when the U.S. got one after the Berlin Wall fell, the U.S. Navy's plan was they were going to do the foreign material exploitation assessment of it. They were going to put it through its paces and take all the data and figure out what it can do and what it can't do and what its strengths and weaknesses were. And then they were going to use it as an op-4 boat in exercises, because this thing could go like, what, 45 knots, something like that. It was pretty fast. Except the gas turbines, it was a combined diesel and gas. So you use diesels when you're sort of just sort of tooling around. But if you want to go fast, you turn on the gas turbines. Gas turbines had a mean time between failures of 26 hours. And they used about 24 hours of it doing all the testing. And so they went, yeah, we're just going to get rid of this. And they donated it to the museum. And the museum ended up getting rid of it because they didn't have, I think it was just entirely we can't maintain it. Mm-hmm. We can't maintain it. And the thing about...
because it needed a lot of time out of the water.
Yeah. The thing about... And the thing about oceans are really, really trying to dissolve the ships.
Yeah, salt water does that.
Yeah. It's really trying to dissolve the ships. And even if you're not the LCS-2 class, which was designed as a water-soluble ship, even if you're not one, you've got to pull the ship out every now and then and do hull work. You just have to. And they didn't have the money to do it. And so they got rid of it. They scrapped it. I haven't been there since they scrapped it. So, but it was a fun little ship, and it was like the only one you could see.
Yep. I got on her twice.
I think the last time I was there, I did not go on board because I didn't have the time. I was up there for a game convention, and they did an event in the morning, but we all got in our cars and drove down to Newport. It was a game convention held at the Naval War College library, the museum, at the museum. And that was a pretty cool idea. So, okay, let's see what else we've got here. Okay, discussion about whether that submarine purchase is actually final or not. I don't know. Yeah, the Royal Navy has more admirals and ships. I think the US Navy does too. The difference between the US Navy and the Royal Navy in that regard is that some of our admirals fly airplanes or flew airplanes, whereas there are no airplane flying admirals because the guys who fly airplanes by definition belong to the Royal Air Force. So even if you're flying off a ship, you're still Royal Air Force, and the Canadians do that as well. I was kind of surprised when my Canadian counterpart, I knew he was a Canadian Air Force officer. I did not realize that he was a helicopter pilot who flew off of ships until he made that comment that, yeah, he had X amount of time at sea. And I said, I thought you were an Air Force guy. And he goes, yeah, Canadian Air Force. I fly maritime helicopters. Absalon would make an excellent name for a Miranda-class starship. I agree. One Horse Shea points out that in the Starfleet Command games, a Miranda hull is used for troop transport. Totally and completely makes sense to me. Scrolling. Scrolling. There's a few things that look like interesting comments, but I don't know what the context was. So I wonder if you can build modularity across ships, Eric Henry asks, like standardized crew quarters. I think the answer to that is sort of. You can certainly, there's a lot of modularity in how the crew quarters are set up in terms of like the stuff that goes in them is very modular. But I would think that that's probably the case, and I would think that certainly would be the case on spaceships.
Well, it certainly is the case on submarines.
Yeah, but I think he's talking about across like classes of submarines or classes of ships.
Well, if you look at the Virginias versus the Ohios, you are working with that standard 9-person bunk module.
Yeah, that tracks. And we have the payload modules, and we have the ballistic missile. I forget what they call the ballistic missile module. I believe that the British boomer and the U.S. boomer have the same payload module. I think. So some of that.
Well, the missile tubes are the same. They're the way they're being built. They're the same.
Yeah. So, Patrick Ross asks, "Can you put the Trident warhead on a smaller missile?" Probably.
Considering there's 10 of them, yeah.
Well, and I was going to say that I think it might actually. I can't remember. Was Trident a new warhead or was it just a new missile?
I think the W-88 was built for the Trident too, because it's a very heavy warhead.
Okay. Yeah, I just don't remember.
Mine were wee little things by comparison.
Poseidon's?
Yep.
I remember doing some back-of-the-envelope calculations in my stats class when I should have been paying attention to what the stats professor was saying. I did some back-of-the-envelope calculations on whether you could turn Poseidon into Midget Man. Because we had just done all the rocket equation stuff in the bombs and rockets class I was taking. And the conclusion that we reached, or the conclusion that I reached was, according to the rocket equation and the other stuff that we had just talked about, it was just barely possible, in which case it probably wouldn't be, because you should always be skeptical when you're at the ends, right? At the ends of the bottle. And then later, when I had the conversation with Brian McHugh about it, his comment was, yeah, that missile's not stressed to bounce around and horizontally across the desert. Brian actually worked on Midget Man. And so that was a big deal about it, is that you're bouncing this thing around. And later on, when I learned how to fire a Scud, as in my job on the Scud firing team was to attach it to the launch table to when they went from horizontal to vertical, and then you have to unattach it to fire it, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't leave it attached when you're bouncing around, because you'll break the missile. But you can't, if you don't bolt the thing down when you lift it up, when it gets to vertical and the lifter stops, the missile will keep on going. Fall off your truck. It will fall off your TEL, and you will get a bad fitness report. And so you had to lock it in place. And so as part of this class where we learned how to do all this stuff, we got a really good feel. It says it takes like a half hour to launch one. I know exactly why it takes a half hour to launch one.
Got to fuel it.
No, even if it's fueled, because I think that one was fueled.
Oh,
it's around fueled. But you got to get the missile into a vertical position, and you got to bolt it down with the big ass wrench. You got to bolt it down and lift it up and then unbolt it. In the meantime, there's a different crew that is doing the surveying, because you shoot this missile by putting in a distance it's going to go and pointing one of the fins very precisely at the direction it's going to go, because it's going to launch in the direction that fin is pointing and go a certain distance and then dive. And so it doesn't have any target seeking capabilities. It's purely a go in this direction and then dive. And so you have to make sure you get that direction correct. You do the gross measurement by how you park the tail, but then the launch table turns, it rotates. And so when you pull up, one set of crews fires up the generator to let you do all this hydraulic stuff. Another group my group started mucking with the missile to tighten it down so that you can lift it. A third group pulls out their surveying gear and does all the surveying stuff so that they can figure out exactly where they are.
We're local vertical
to the target. And when you add all that stuff up, it's about 30 or 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm. So when you were futzing with midget men, you were looking at an Ohio, right?
I was just so Trident was coming online, and I knew
Trident 2 or Trident 1.
Trident, I think it was Trident 1, because they were replacing the Poseidons.
Yeah, you ain't fitting a midget man in a Poseidon tube. Not even close.
No. You got it backwards.
Okay.
You got it backwards. I was saying you've got these missiles that you've already built. You're pulling them off the submarines because you're replacing it with a new missile.
Right.
Could I use that thing as Midget Man? If I dropped it down to one warhead, would it have the range to get to the Soviet Union? And the answer is just barely. But I didn't believe that because I'm at the extremes of the model, and because it's a short, stubby missile. It's not a very short, stubby submarine missile, as opposed to move through the atmosphere. Yeah. And then on top of that, Brian McHugh said, yeah, you've got this really broken assumption about how durable that missile is.
They like to be vertical.
They like to be vertical. And they like to be pampered.
Indeed.
Whereas Midget Man was by definition not going to be pampered. It was going to be bouncing around in the back of a U-Haul. So Delon points out that you got to put the screens up high enough so that if you've got a tall officer sitting there, the captain can look over his head. Okay, that works. Let's see, scrolling. So Wright asked me if I started watching the Flat Circle History series. I think I know what he's talking about. And no, I haven't. One of them popped up in my feed. If this is what I think it's about, it's like it's a notional global war that's done as a series of YouTube videos. And it's something that at some point I need to binge watch all my way through, and I just haven't gotten to the point of binge watching it or binge listening to it, because a lot of YouTube stuff I just listen to. Allah said that the Koreans do a great main battle tank, the K2, which it's got like one of the things it supposedly has is like the best diesel engine in the world and the best transmission in the world, which is a lot to say in a world that has Germans in it.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
The Germans, frequently there's a lot of old world craftsmanship in German designs. When you look at the pintle mount of the machine gun on the World War II tank and it's got like 80 parts, it's like, no, I just need a stick that I can mount the gun on. I don't need 80 parts. But I'm very impressed with that tank. I'm very impressed with that tank. I'm generally impressed. I'm impressed with the Koreans' gear. I did work with the Koreans once, a Korean submarine once. I was not necessarily impressed by their tactics and how they handled stuff. They had a tendency to just sort of pop up to periscope depth and then snorkel for 8 hours.
They were learning.
Yeah. And there may have been some very specific reasons as to why they were doing it that way. I don't have any indication as to whether they were training like they fight like they train. The Australians also had issues in that exercise, but the Australians had issues because they were down a diesel, because they're always down a diesel because their diesel suck.
Mm-hmm.
And they even had to get special dispensation from the prime minister to actually, because the diesel broke on their way over to RIMPAC, and they had to get special dispensation from the prime minister to continue the journey. And so I think that the Australians spent the entire exercise not pushing their gear. The Japanese, on the other hand, pushed their gear.
Mm-hmm.
They were quite impressive. Natsushio, the commander of Natsushio, was quite impressive. Okay, let's see. Wright says that he hopes the South Koreans can help modernize the Philly shipyard. Me too. Olive says, not sure what I was talking about. The Koreans are selling everything to everybody. They're selling airplanes, they're selling tanks, they're selling submarines. To the best of my knowledge, they're not selling surface warships. I don't remember.
They're trying.
They're trying. Is that they're trying to sell that funky Aegis ship that's got like 130 tubes or whatever it is?
KDX-3.
It's that's not the name I know it by. I want to say it's like the Gore. No, that's not right. It's named after some like Korean king or something like that. And it's got a lot of tubes. And you're looking it up. And while you're looking it up,
that's the KDX-3 is the Sejong the Great.
Yeah, that's okay. Same ship. How many tubes does it have?
Let's see what they say here. It's got 80 VLS cells, 48 forward, 32 aft, but then they have the Korean vertical launch, which is 48, so that's 128.
Okay. I thought it had more than that. I thought it had like 40.
Well, the KVLS allows them to shoot ballistic missiles too, if they want.
Do they have ballistic missiles?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
In fact, the KSS-3 batch 2 has got 10 vertical launch tubes.
Oh, okay. Good for them. That's cool. So Patrick Ross asks, how far into prepping the Scud are you when the fighter bombers show up? There were no fighter bombers attacking us in Charlottesville. They did not come and attack us in Charlottesville. So this is also the one where we were allowed to climb all over the Scud launcher. We could, climb up on top of it. In fact, even when the missile was up, the back of the launch thing on the side of the missile has a ladder on it. And they said, if you want to climb up on the ladder, none of us took them up on that offer. There's no way I'm going to climb up on that ladder. But my boss, who Chris, got up on the cab of the tell and to take a picture of the writing that was on the missile. And so I'm on the ground in front of the tell, and I take a picture of him up there, and he's holding the camera down. And from the angle that I've got in this picture, it looks like he's getting ready to take a leak on the missile.
Of course it is.
And so I immediately emailed that to one of my colleagues back in the office, 500 feet away, and said, do something with this. And when my boss came back to the office, and I sent it to the guy who does all the demotivational posters in the office. And when Jeff got back to his office, on his door was a picture, that picture with the caption leadership underneath it. Okay, let's see. All right, Wright says he's interested in my analysis on the flat circle history thing. So, hey, maybe I'll do a show on it. Actually, just occurred to me that actually would be a good topic. All right, let's see. The Germans built an 86-ton tank with a transmission from a 23-ton tank. Yeah, the Germans occasionally did stuff like that. Okay. All right. I think it's actually, I'm all the way down, so I think it's probably time to finish. Alyssa, who was not here at the beginning, has joined us, and I think she's probably gonna. Oh, I thought she was gonna pop in.
I've been here for over an hour.
I saw you when it beeped when you popped in. I saw it when you popped in. But she had something else she had to do at the beginning of the show.
My husband off at work.
Yes. So, but she is here. She is alive. So.
I'm Schrodinger's cat girl. I am both alive and dead at any given
moment. And so I think, Chris, any last words?
Good night, Gracie.
So thank you very much, Chris, for being on the show again. It's always a pleasure to have you on. You're always welcome. Thank you to everybody who's decided to spend your Saturday night with us again. I'm always appreciative of the fact that people do that. Thank you to Lissa, who I don't thank nearly as much as I should, at least in public. Thank you, Lissa, for showing up and helping out and being prepared to troubleshoot stuff. We don't usually have any problems, but every now and then there's something, and she's very good at this. Yeah, I should not tempt fate. But thank you very much, everybody. And let's do it again, not next week, but the week after. Thanks, everybody. Have a good one.